very much the comedy act at the very end here. Thank you, Eugenia, for ending with Nanny Ogg, because I'm gonna pick up on that thread and keep pulling it. Let's be honest, Nanny Ogg is one of the greatest characters in the Discworld, who is crucially and criminally undervalued. I suppose, like an awful lot of Pratchett's characters, like an awful lot of Pratchett's work, she has this trajectory. I mean, Dara mentions this idea of the progression in the Tiffany Aching series, but we see it in individual characters too. And I find that Pratchett's work moves from comedy to commentary, if you like, that it moves from being these sorts of parodies or spoofs of existing fantasy texts, you know, the Lord of the Rings and things like this. Let's just have three witches. Let's make one of them, you know, quite fat and vulgar. But moving from that sort of stock comedy character, he develops her over the course of the books into something that really is very powerful, really says something about women's power within these communities, and allows Nanny to take on this role that has this, not just a background figure, but I think a very important counterpointing figure throughout the series that she's in. Nanny is an edge witch. You know, she's somebody who's associated with birth and death and rebirth, and she has this underrated power, not just because it's associated with woman's power, with women's things, but also because it's out of sight a lot of the time. It's the stuff that happens in the background of the community that keeps things moving. That childbirth and laying out the dead, these are things that happen kind of behind closed doors, and then everybody else is let in when the bodies is cleaned up and when the blood's been mopped away, and it's just mum sitting with this lovely shiny baby wrapped up in a towel. You know, the screaming and the blood has happened behind the closed doors, and Nanny's the one to deal with all of that. You know, she's the witch that goes actually into fairyland, in beneath the dancers, and threatens the king of the elves with iron in a horseshoe that she's carried in her apron. She's this really fascinating character, and I think she's underappreciated. So I'm going to take this chance to talk about her a lot. Pratchett says that he's suspected deep down that Nanny's the most powerful of the witches, and part of her charm lies in the way that she prevents people from finding this out. And Pratchett, of course, we all know, is too clever a writer to use a word like charm without knowing its double connotations, that she is both sort of socially fluid and charming and nice, but charming in the sense of charm as a witchcraft, as a type of glamour that she has, that she exercises over the people that she comes into contact with. She fits in everywhere. And partly this is because of her black dress that is equally good at a wine reception or a funeral or mucking out a barn. Nobody notices her because she's an old lady. And this sort of social invisibility actually is the key to her social power. If we look at some of the things that are said about Nanny through the books, a mind like a buzzsaw behind a face like an elderly apple. I mean, what an image. I think it's something that's missing from that sort of AI-generated Pratchett-esque story, perhaps, is that sort of incisive, weird imagery. Nanny's philosophy of life was to do what seemed like a good idea at the time and do it as hard as possible. She's open to changing her mind, which is something that the other witches really struggle with. Nanny is much more fluid than that. And crucially, when we get to Masquerade, she's the one who respects that Agnes wants to be called Perdita as well, you know, that she respected anyone's right to recreate themselves. Because, of course, Nanny herself has recreated herself many times. She's had many husbands, they say, and she's been married to 3 of them. And crucially, all of her husbands' surnames are Ogg. You know, she's always somehow been Mrs. Ogg. And the relationship between these men never really got into. But the important thing is that she has this sort of matriarchal power over it. They all become Oggs through their connection with her. Yes. So this is the first time we see her. This is the first introduction we get to her. And it's like this amazingly little tight piece of characterization. And this is what I love so much about Pratchett's work, is that his books are actually quite short. You know, The Hobbit is 95,000 words long, guys, like, it's so long, you know, and then Pratchett has to do appendices and everything else. Pratchett's like, I'm just going to do 2 sentences and you'll get on with it, you know. In their clearing above the forest, the witches spoke thus. I'm babysitting on Tuesday, said the one with no hat but a thatch of white curls so thick she might have been wearing a helmet. For our Jason's youngest. I can manage Friday. Hurry up with the tea, love, I'm that parched. This whole thing that witching is going to take second place to babysitting for Jason's youngest. The family comes first. Her duty as mother, grandmother, babysitter, person in charge of all of this comes first for her. But she's not going to waste the time not telling Margaret what to do. In The Thief of Time, we start to see Nanny as a much more powerful figure, though, that Pratchett develops her out as an edge witch. And she says she's seen hundreds into the world, even trolls, which is no errand for the inexperienced. I know birthing backwards and forwards and damn near sideways at times. Always been ready to learn something new, though. She looked down modestly. I wouldn't say I'm the best, she said, but I can't think of anyone better, I have to say. And this, you know, there's this constant thing with the witches about their pride and their egoism and all the rest of it. And now here, she knows full well she's the best midwife in the entire world over time. This stranger has been coming through time again and again and again to find her at different moments, to find the moment when she is the best midwife, not just in the world, but the best that she can be. She has been a midwife for trolls. Let's just think for a moment of what this means. It's incredible, you know, that Lucas Boulding has just put his finger on it when he says that Nanny Ogg is not a bit player enabling Granny Weatheraxe's heroics, but a powerful witch in a different mould, and without whom no novel in the witches sequence would have turned out in triumph. You know, even in Paul Kidsby's illustrations, she's so often standing behind Granny, you know, but she's the person pushing Granny forward all the time, sometimes off onto the edge of a cliff. But we can't talk about Nanny without talking about apples. You know, this is the mind like a buzzsaw behind a face like an elderly apple. It's so important that, you know, she makes this scumble, which is mostly apples. And apples are this recurring image the whole way through the books. If you go back through them, there's so many images about apples, harvesting, gathering apples, drinking cider, that are really crucial to Nanny as a person. And she sees herself as like an apple. You know, she describes herself as tasty, a bit wrinkled, but a damn good keeper. But her vulgarity is all bound up with this idea of the apple, because you can't read about apples in literature without thinking about Eve. That's just it. You get apples, you get Eve. And of course, Eve is very sad about the whole thing. You know, it seemed like a great idea at the time. She did it, which is Nanny Ogg does things that seem like a great idea at the time. Eve is, in Masacchio's illustration, understandably devastated. Adam's been sentenced to work. God, awful. Annie does not care. This is a fallen woman who has fallen good and hard, and she enjoys every minute of it. That her power comes from her vulgarity, both in the sense that she's vulgar of the people with the community, you know, of the everyday stuff, but vulgar as in the sort of enthusiastic sexuality as well, you know, that she is all about this edge witchery that comes from female sexuality. You can't be dealing with births and rebirths if you haven't had sex in the first place. You know, this is what she's into. This is her role in the community, is teaching young girls how to count, very crucial, you know, and how to enjoy themselves, you know, without falling prey to these things. She said she's had many husbands and even been married to 3 of them. Some achievement. Nanny is so enthusiastic about these things that she writes a book, The Joy of Snacks. It's a parody, I suppose, on the joy of sex. You well have heard of this book from the 70s, written by Alex Comfort, 1972. A gourmet guide to lovemaking. It's laid out in recipes, aperitifs, starters, main courses. If you haven't read it, it's great. But that itself was a parody of an earlier book from the 1930s called The Joy of Cooking. And in The Joy of Snacks, Nanny Ogg is bringing together cooking and sex in this wonderful way that only Nanny Ogg can. It includes recipes for things like banana soup surprise. If you have a strong stomach, do look up the images of banana soup surprise. Some fans have tried to make it. It's interesting. Quite a lot of the recipes are really just anecdotes about encounters in the bedroom, if you like. I've just decided to pull up some stats on it just because I think it was interesting that in Masquerade, when they talk about the joy of snacks, the title page now comes with this sort of banner heading, say that it's in its 127th reprint, which is pretty good, and it says that it's more than 20,000 sold with an E. So considering that the Joy of Snacks is supposed to be made before the advent of movable type in the disc, this is made by engraving. They have to hire very elderly engravers to make this book because anybody else gets a bit hot and bothered. But if it's sold more than 20,000, right, that means there's a copy of the Joy of Snacks in the hands of 1 in every 5 citizens in Ankh-Morpork, which is a bestseller by anybody's reckoning, But if you look in the 15th century, this is after the advent of movable type, when it was easier to make these things. The average edition of a book printed in the 15th century didn't make more than 200 copies, 200 printings. Martin Luther's sermons, probably quite important things, were expected to sell maybe 2,000 copies. So 20,000 makes this a runaway success. And it suggests that Nanny Ogg's power is something that everybody wants a piece of. Yes, obviously female sexuality comes with male sexuality, and she is instrumental in bringing about the resolution in Lord and Ladies by going down under the dancers into this realm of the Elf King. He's a sort of Cernunnos deity. This is the Carnabbas giant in Dorset, possibly in Discworld, because in one of the Tiffany Aching books they talk about the women getting together to weed it, shall we say, make sure it's respectable, and sort of have little chats about the things that young girls might need to know about these things. So Nanny has this ability to go not just into the sort of human and troll wombs, if you like, but into the bowels of the earth, into the womb of the earth, and birth forth things as well. That she's somebody who goes to these edge landscapes and places that nobody wants to go to, nobody else can go to, because she has this power. Because if there is a sort of green man, Cernunnos, man of the earth, we also have this green woman that I think Nanny Ogg is absolutely part of. And the joke comes in Wintersmith. Dara's mentioned it earlier about Tiffany coming to stay with Nanny in her house. Nanny's house is called Tir Nanny Ogg. So anybody with Irish will recognize this as Tir Nanny Ogg, the land of the forever young, the land of forever youth, but also a land of eternal renewal and rebirthing. This is the place where things get remade. That she is a sort of earth figure, if you like, an earth mother in some ways, but also earthly and vulgar and of the things that are under the ground and of the earth. And it's absolutely appropriate then that she has this space that she controls that is about that sort of power of rejuvenation and revival, and in that space that Tiffany becomes not just more of who she is, but somebody new as well. She kind of births Tiffany as a different type of witch. So I'm going to stop. I realize that I've taken up a lot of your time. We've taken up a lot of your evening. Thank you so much for coming out for us for Culture Night. It's always a pleasure to have a crowd. I'm sure there are questions for Dara, for Yevgenia. There might even be some for myself. But we'll leave it there. If you've got questions, let us know. They all want to go home.
Jane's desperate to run away, but I said there is a question. Go ahead.
That was wonderful. Thank you all so much. Because we had to rush, I was just wondering if the slide might be shared as a link with the YouTube video or something later on.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to pass on slides and things. Yeah.
I'm filming, so I'm planning to upload things to YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, by the way.
I always forget to mention.
Any other questions for anyone?
Which one is your favorite?
Which one?
Which, yeah.
Of which of the
Yeah,
novels
yeah.
or the characters?
Well, I'm thinking the book section.
I don't know. That's a very hard question. I think my favorite thing Terry Pratchett ever wrote was Nation. I think it's not a Discworld book, but I think, oh my God, what a book. If you only wrote one book in your lifetime, that would be an incredible book to have written. And he wrote so much before and so much after, but Nation, I think, is special. Of the Discworld books, I think, I don't know, I'm very big fans of Chief Aiken ones. I think the one that I keep coming back to is probably the Wee Free Man. I think it's got so much of what Terry Pratchett's trying to do over a whole series kind of condensed into this amazing world. Yeah. Haven't faced Shepherd's Crown a second time.
No,
Weeping. So much weeping. Yeah.
So I reread Truckers and I bawled.
I didn't expect it at all. I was just flying about.
It's really close and that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I also have to say,
I think so. I'd like to
My
hear you
favorite?
as well.
to be honest, my favorite is Sad. I can read and read it many times, and it's all about how you create other from alien, from enemy. So when you understand other, the other, and when you understand yourself. And the way how lions resist this summoning dark, yeah, it's absolutely a great thing. And these two texts at the very beginning, at the very end, when the genial text arises, and we understand that all the three peoples are kings. Yes, and how the West recreate the attitude, and how the dwarfs were trying to bring their alien, the evil image of gold. That's important, and that also it shows step by step how that aggressive narrative works.
Perhaps, sorry.
And it was so true.
Any other questions? I think we've exhausted everybody. Well, thank you so much for the meeting. Thank you so much for joining us. So if we can do that.